Don't touch that! Do you hear me?
The crystal flute slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor, and Margot Kingsley's voice, sharp as glass, slicing through the ballroom.
Someone get her away from the artwork before she ruins it completely.
The crowd turned, a blur of diamonds, tuxedos, and disgust. There she stood, a little black girl no older than 8, dress wrinkled, eyes wide, clutching a half-drawn sketch. A waiter tried to help her up. Margot slapped his hand away.
Don't touch her. Let her mother handle her mistakes.
The laughter rippled again. One guest whispered, "They always bring their children to these events. Can't they afford babysitters?" Another chuckled. Cameras flashed. The humiliation was public, merciless, unstoppable. It was supposed to be the highlight of the year, the Sterling Foundation Charity Gala. A night of glitter, champagne, and hollow compliments, where the rich came not to help, but to be seen helping. Every chandelier sparkled like a performance. Every smile was rehearsed. And at the center of it all, the Kingsley family. The Kingsleys were old money. The kind of family that treated humility like a disease. William Kingsley, a steel magnate with hands that hadn't known dirt in 40 years. And beside him, his wife, Margot Kingsley, elegance sharpened into cruelty. Their teenage daughter, Lila, stood between them, dressed in silver silk, scrolling her phone, utterly bored by the charity meant to change the world. But that night, the Kingsleys would learn that money can't buy immunity from consequence. Because in the middle of the grand ballroom, beneath the soft glow of crystal light, a little black girl was standing alone, clutching a sketchbook to her chest. Her name was Amira, 8 years old. Quiet. She wore a simple cream dress that didn't shimmer or sparkle, but her eyes did. Bright, curious, full of wonder. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least, not in their eyes. Her mother worked for the event staff, arranging the floral centerpieces, and when childcare fell through, she brought Amira along, hoping she could quietly sit in the corner and draw. But Amira didn't stay in the corner. No, she wandered toward the massive art display near the ballroom entrance. On the easel stood a portrait, one painted to honor the night's main benefactor, the mysterious new donor who had promised to triple the foundation's funding for underprivileged schools. The artist had left her brushes beside it, and while guests mingled, Amira, innocent and curious, took a pencil and began sketching a tiny correction, an adjustment to the portrait's crooked smile. The crowd noticed. A ripple of whispers. Then, a voice, cold and loud enough to stop the music. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Every head turned. Amira froze, pencil in hand. "Where are your parents, child?" Amira stammered. I was just fixing it," the smile looked. "Fixing it? Oh, that's adorable. She thinks she's an artist." The laughter spread like wildfire, cruel, rich, infectious. Cameras turned. Someone recorded. In seconds, the little girl's world collapsed into humiliation. Margot leaned down, voice dripping with disdain. "Do you even know what this painting costs? That brush you're holding is worth more than your mother's monthly salary." Amira's small hands trembled. She whispered an apology, eyes filling with tears. But it wasn't enough. Because humiliation, to people like the Kingsleys, wasn't about correction, it was about performance. So Margot straightened, smiled for the cameras, and said loudly, "This is why we fund programs like these, to teach manners to the less fortunate." The laughter deepened. Amira's mother, Naomi, pushed through the crowd, breathless, her apron still dusted with petals. "Amira, what happened?" Margot folded her arms. "Your daughter was tampering with a commissioned piece. I think it's best if you both leave." Naomi's face went pale. Her daughter's tears glistened like broken glass. She took her hand gently, murmured, "It's okay, baby, let's go." But just as they turned to leave, a voice rose from the back of the room. Deep, commanding, controlled. "No, you're not going anywhere." The crowd parted like a tide. Silence followed, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. From the far end of the ballroom, a tall man walked in, not hurried, not angry, but deliberate. Every step is measured, every glance piercing. He wore a black tailored suit that didn't need logos to announce wealth. It was the kind of elegance that whispered authority. The security team hesitated. The event organizers froze. Because they recognized him. Cameron Duvall. The name that echoed across business headlines, political forums, and boardrooms. A man whispered about, never underestimated. Founder of Duval Global, one of the largest private education trusts in the world. He stopped just a few feet from Margot Kingsley. The air tightened. Is this how you treat children at a charity meant to support them? Margot blinked, then forced a laugh. Oh, Mr. Duval, this was just a misunderstanding. The little girl. Her name is Amira. That stopped her. He crouched down to Amira's level. His voice softened. Did you fix the smile? Amira nodded shyly. Yes, sir. It looked sad. He smiled faintly. Good. Art should make people feel, not just impress them. Then he stood again, and the softness vanished. He turned to William Kingsley, who was now sweating beneath his smug composure. Tell me, William, how much did your family contribute to this event? William straightened, clearing his throat. $500,000. Cameron nodded slowly. And how much of that went to the actual schools? William hesitated. That's not really my department. Cameron stepped closer. That's right. Because your department has appearances. The room held its breath. Cameron's assistant, a woman in a navy blazer, quietly handed him a folder. He flipped it open and scanned a few pages before speaking again. According to the Sterling Foundation's expense report, less than 12% of tonight's funds go toward education. The rest, travel stipends, private catering, wardrobe allowances. He raised his eyes. And a $14,000 floral arrangement, courtesy of Naomi's team. The crowd shifted uneasily. Margot's smile cracked. You humiliated the woman who made this event beautiful, and mocked her child. The very kind of child this gala was meant to uplift. He turned to the nearest journalist, cameras already rolling. Now tell me, he said, does that sound like charity, or a circus? A murmur spread through the crowd. The violinist stopped playing entirely. Naomi stood frozen, her hand still clutching Amira's. Every instinct told her to run, to disappear, but Cameron's presence anchored her. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. Every word hit like quiet thunder. Margot tried to recover her tone. Mr. Duval, I think this is all a big overreaction. We didn't mean to. Mean to what, Mrs. Kingsley? Remind a child of her place? She flinched. For the first time that night, Margot Kingsley, queen of every room, was speechless. Cameron turned slightly, scanning the crowd. His eyes were sharp, unblinking. He saw everything. The luxury, the pride, the hypocrisy wrapped in pearls. And then, in a calm tone that sent chills down every spine, he said, let's make one thing clear. If a single soul in this room thinks wealth grants the right to belittle a child, then tonight's donations are nothing but blood money. A gasp spread. Naomi stared at him, disbelief mixing with recognition. Because now she remembered. That name, that face. Duval Global. The same foundation that had funded her daughter's art scholarship last year, anonymously. Amira's scholarship. And suddenly, everything clicked. Cameron turned to her, voice gentler now. Naomi, you and Amira don't need to leave. He glanced at the event coordinator. They do. The coordinator hesitated, stammering. Sir, the Kingsleys are finished here. The words were final. Margot's face turned pale. Mr. Duval, this is outrageous. We've supported this foundation for years. Cameron's tone never rose. Yes, and you've done so for applause, not impact. He turned to the cameras again, lowering his voice. I'll be making a public statement about this event. Effective immediately, the Sterling Foundation will no longer manage any Duval donations. The room erupted in murmurs, confusion, disbelief, fear. Cameron's assistant whispered something in his ear. He nodded once, eyes still on Margot. Then he said quietly, and one more thing. You said this child didn't belong here. He looked down at Amira, then back at them. But you're mistaken. This gala, this entire event, was built for her. Margot's jaw tightened. What are you talking about? Cameron smiled slightly, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that came before revelation, the kind that made silence louder than thunder. He said, softly, you'll find out soon enough. The Kingsleys stood frozen, the illusion of power crumbling with every heartbeat. Lila's phone, still recording, trembled in her hand. Social media had already begun to light up with the unfolding scandal. Within minutes, hashtags were forming. The crowd that once laughed, now looked away. William tried to salvage dignity. This is absurd, Duval. You can't just walk in here and... I can. Because I own this venue. The silence that followed was deafening. Cameron turned to the events director. Shut down the gala. Refund every attendee who wishes to leave. And double the donations to the schools, from my personal account. The director nodded, stunned. Naomi's hand tightened around her daughter's. Sir, you don't have to do that, she whispered. Cameron looked at her, his tone soft but resolute. I do. Because people like them make a mockery of what giving should mean. Then, addressing the crowd. You all came here dressed for charity. But real charity doesn't wear diamonds. It looks like a mother who works 2 jobs and still teaches her daughter to dream. Every word struck like poetry, measured, deliberate, final. The cameras caught everything. The humiliation, now reversed. The power, reclaimed. And just when the Kingsleys thought it was over, Cameron's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then smirked slightly. He looked at Margot, his tone smooth as silk. Oh, it seems the press just released an announcement. Margot frowned. What announcement? Cameron took a step closer, lowering his voice to a whisper only she could hear. You wanted to know who the mystery donor was, the one funding this year's event. She nodded slowly. Cameron's gaze flicked toward Amira. Then he said, You'll find out in about 60 seconds. Try not to faint. The screen behind the stage suddenly flickered. The planned slideshow interrupted. A new video began to play. Footage of children smiling in classrooms. School murals painted with color and hope. The Duval Global logo appeared, followed by text in gold letters. This year's anonymous donor dedicates their gift to one child, whose talent reminds us that vision has no color and greatness has no permission. The camera panned to a small sketchbook. The same sketchbook Amira was holding. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. Cameron turned back to the Kingsleys, his expression unreadable. Margot's face was drained of color. Lila dropped her phone, and then the screen faded to black, leaving one final line glowing in white. In honor of Amira Duval. Gasps. Whispers. The room went dead still. Margot's lips parted. Duval, what did that just say? Cameron's eyes were calm, almost gentle. She's my daughter. Every head turned. Every camera froze. And that's where the night changed, forever. Because in one room filled with the richest people in the city, the poorest in kindness had just been exposed, and the world was watching. The room stood still. Not one breath. Not one whisper. Only the echo of truth, stretching through marble halls that had never known humility. Cameron Duval's words hung heavy in the air. She's my daughter. Margot's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her husband's hand trembled slightly as his gaze darted from Amira to Cameron, searching for denial, for escape, for anything that could undo what had just been revealed. But Cameron didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply reached down, took Amira's hand in his, and said softly, loud enough for every camera, every witness. Her mother taught her kindness. I'll make sure the world remembers her strength. Then he turned, guiding Naomi and Amira toward the exit. And that's when the impossible happened. The same people who had laughed at the little girl only minutes before began to clap. Not the polite, hollow clapping of the elite, but the kind that comes from shame meeting grace. A sound of repentance. Margot stood frozen, her mascara beginning to run. Lila's eyes filled with tears she didn't understand. And William, the man who prided himself on control, suddenly felt small for the first time in his life. Cameron paused near the door. He didn't turn around, but his voice carried like thunder wrapped in calm. You wanted to humiliate a child because of where she came from. But remember this, power doesn't reveal character. Moments like these do. Then he walked out, and the gala, once filled with vanity and laughter, dissolved into silence and reflection. News of the incident spread faster than wildfire. Clips from the gala flooded every platform. Headlines screamed, Rich family humiliates black child. Then learns she's the daughter of the donor who funds their foundation. Cameron Duval shuts down the Kingsleys, on camera. Little Amira Duval becomes symbol of dignity. By noon, brands were pulling endorsements from the Kingsleys companies. By sunset, their stock had dropped 15%. Margot's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Angry investors, canceled interviews, endless calls from PR teams. For the first time, the family who once controlled every narrative couldn't control their own. But that night, while the internet cheered Cameron's calm destruction of their arrogance, He sat quietly beside Amira's bed, watching her sleep. Naomi entered softly, her voice gentle. You could have destroyed them completely. Cameron nodded slowly. I know. Why didn't you? He sighed. Because if I end them, nothing changes. But if I teach them, really teach them, maybe the world learns something too. He reached out, brushing a curl from his daughter's forehead. She shouldn't grow up in a world where people only change out of fear. They need to change because they finally see. Naomi smiled faintly. That's harder. Cameron nodded. Exactly. And so began a quiet war. Not of revenge, but of redemption. Cameron didn't issue a public statement attacking the Kingsleys. Instead, he announced a new initiative, the Empathy Project, a nationwide effort to reform corporate behavior through awareness training, education reform, and diversity mentorship. And the first family invited to join? The Kingsleys. Social media exploded. Half the world demanded their punishment. The other half watched curiously, waiting to see what came next. Cameron didn't defend them. He just said, watch what they do next. That's the real apology. 6 months later, the Kingsleys were no longer the Kingsleys the world remembered. They'd sold their mansion, closed their offshore accounts, and downsized, not because they were broke, but because they were finally awake. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. William spent the first months angry at the media, at Cameron, at everyone but himself. Until one day, while cleaning out old files, he found a letter addressed to Mr. Duval. It was a scholarship thank you note, written years ago by a student who'd grown up in the same city where William built his factories. The letter read, "Thank you for believing that kids like me deserve to be seen." And that was the moment something broke and began to rebuild. William reached out to Cameron privately. No cameras, no speeches, just an email. I was blind. Teach me how to see. Cameron agreed, on one condition, that William, Margot, and Lila would work directly with his foundation, not as donors, as volunteers. So they did. For months, they sat in classrooms where the walls were cracked and the floors creaked. They listened to single mothers talk about juggling 2 jobs and night school. They heard children describe being followed around stores or being told to stay in their lane. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. Margot, once obsessed with image, now spent mornings helping organize free lunch programs. Her manicured hands, once symbols of luxury, learned the rhythm of packing boxes, scrubbing tables, tying hairnets. And little by little, she began to smile, not the polite, performative kind, but the kind born of purpose. Lila, meanwhile, started documenting their journey online. But this time, not as a socialite influencer, as a student of humanity. Her videos went viral, not for aesthetics, but honesty. She spoke about unlearning prejudice, about privilege, about watching her mother's tears and her father's silence. And the world forgave her. Because when truth is told without excuses, it can heal. Then came the biggest change of all. William and Cameron appeared side by side at the National Education Reform Summit. No applause, no grandstanding, just a shared purpose. Cameron spoke first, his tone calm as always. Forgiveness doesn't erase what was done. It rewrites what can come next. Then William took the mic, his hands shaking. My name is William Kingsley, and I'm not here as a donor tonight. I'm here as a student of my own ignorance. The crowd fell silent. He continued, I thought charity was about writing checks, but it's really about righting wrongs. Applause thundered through the room, not because of his status, but because of his courage to admit what so many never do. After the summit, corporations began reaching out to the Empathy Project, asking for the same training the Kingsleys went through. What began as a scandal became a model. By winter, over 200 companies had enrolled. New leadership programs, inclusive boards, reformed hiring practices. Change was spreading, quietly, steadily. And one afternoon, while visiting a small school his foundation funded, Cameron stood watching Amira present her art to a classroom full of kids. Each painting carried a message. See me, don't judge me. Naomi stood beside him, smiling proudly. Looks like your plan worked, she said softly. Cameron nodded. It's just beginning. 2 years later, what started as one moment of humiliation became a movement of hope. The Kingsleys, now quiet philanthropists, used their shame as fuel for systemic change. They partnered with the Empathy Project to launch nationwide Grace in Leadership programs, teaching executives how to recognize bias and rebuild trust. Margot, once the face of privilege, now stood before universities and youth groups, speaking about empathy. Her message was simple. I used to think image was everything. Now I know integrity is louder. Lila, now 21, had become one of the most followed voices in social advocacy. Her series, Before You Judge, featured stories from people across races and backgrounds, each one a reminder that humanity can't be measured in wealth. And William? He did something no one expected. He turned his steel factories into green community training centers, providing scholarships and mentorship for underprivileged youth. He even hired the same children whose schools he once ignored. When asked in an interview why he made the change, he said quietly, "Because once a little girl reminded me that true strength doesn't raise its voice, it raises its values." The world had changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but meaningfully. Governments began adopting the empathy curriculum for leadership programs. Companies rewrote their policies. Schools introduced Duval Ethics scholarships. And every year, on the anniversary of the gala, Cameron hosted a private dinner. No cameras, no headlines, just the people who learned, and those still learning. At the head of the table sat Amira, now 10, confident and radiant. She sketched quietly as her father spoke. That night, Margot walked over to her with a shy smile. "May I see what you're drawing?" Amira nodded. It was a picture of a tree, one half dead and gray, the other alive and green, blooming with light. Underneath, she'd written, "People can grow, too." Margot's eyes glistened. She whispered, "That's beautiful." Amira looked up. "My mom says flowers grow best after rain." Margot nodded, voice trembling. She's right. In that moment, the child they once shamed had become their teacher, and they, her lifelong students. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes, it looks like a reflection. The Kingsleys didn't lose everything. They found what truly mattered. And Cameron Duval didn't destroy them. He rebuilt them, one truth at a time. Because power isn't in how loudly you can strike back. It's in how quietly you can lift others up, even the ones who tried to tear you down. That night at the gala began as a story of humiliation, but it ended as a lesson for every heart that's ever been underestimated. If you've ever been mocked for where you come from, remember Amira. Remember that grace is louder than cruelty, and that your worth doesn't need validation from anyone who refuses to see it. If this story moved you, share it. Not for views, not for clicks, but because somewhere, another child like Amira is being told she doesn't belong. And maybe your share is the light that tells her she does. Subscribe if you believe in stories that heal. Comment if you believe change starts with seeing people as people. And remember, justice isn't always a storm. Sometimes it's a seed. And 2 years later, that seed has already begun to bloom.